Hello and welcome back to video 10 of our evaluation series. I want to go ahead and get this covered because it's a topic that's a primary function of IP control that we're going to use for interaction with DNS. And in most environments, that interaction with DNS involves Windows, Active Directory, and allowing those servers to maintain their zones and then simply passively capturing data from those servers, but allowing us to then import the information into their respective domains and then import even the IP addresses that we've determined from the resource records if they don't exist. So I'm going to do a couple of things in this video so that we can kind of effectively demonstrate this and really the requirements behind it. So the first thing I'm going to do, and I just discovered this again, I want to go back in and take all those IP addresses that we had in there, and I'm just going to delete them so you can see the effect of this. Don't do this in your production environment there. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a DNS server manually. It's not a Sapphire. So I'm going to add a DNS server, and I'm going to say that this is a Microsoft 2016 DNS. And this is my Windows 2016 dev priv 192.168.1.40. And I'm going to use the executive agent for this purpose here, and that's all I want to do. So the first stage is I need to define an Active Directory DNS server that we're going to configure to send notifies to us that will serve as the primary DNS that we interact with, or what we'll have to call the master DNS. So under the zones, I have a zone that's out there now. And in my environment, the server is the master for that. And I don't have it here. So next step, we need to go to Management Domains. And we need to add the domains that are going to be imported or listened to on the Microsoft server. Now, devpriv is my internal domain, and I'm going to set that up now. So under zones, we're going to do the add DNS and master. Select dev. I want to enable dynamic DNS, but more importantly, I wanted to have this listener. So I'm going to leave this off for now, but I'm going to, well, actually, I do need to have that for the listener. And we'll do non-secure for this, just for the option's sake. One thing to note is through the agent installed on the DNS server, we can manage the DNS zones in the Active Directory and deploy changes and effectively update and manage the zones themselves. All right, and lastly there, we'll set that up. That'll then allow us to define to that server, hey, you're the primary. When a DNS notify comes in, telling me that the zone has changed, and I identify that DNS server, this one, its IP address as being the primary, I'm going to do a zone transfer. So now we have effectively two different pieces that we need to do, and one of those is we need to set up a notify and an also notify on the domain controller. So I'm going to go over and jump over to my server real quick, and I want to see if I can find my DNS settings here. So we'll pop the MMC here, and under the forward zones, I have my devpriv. Now, I guess a couple things we can look at here too, depending on delegation even. What we're going to do here with devpriv is anything that falls under devpriv, including the underscore zones, are going to initially be flattened, which means that they'll show up as origins under the domain and effectively subdomains, if you will. Now, we do have this in would, think this out ahead of time and say, here are the underscore zones. We would go ahead and delegate them, perhaps back to the Microsoft DNS server, and then we would only focus on the forward domain or something along those lines. Or if we were to take over all of the zones, we would delegate those underscore zones more specifically, and we'd delegate them, as opposed to wrapping them up into a devpriv. So what I'm going to do here, though, just that point of reference, I need to go to the zone transfer, and I need to say to any server, only servers in the name server tab, which first of all, our IPControl service isn't really a name server. It just pretends to be. It does the notifies and listens and other services. So I'm not going to have that there, but we may want to have a list. And so what I'm going to do is I need to modify my list to include my IPControl executive, and you should as well. Now, you may not have the ability to resolve it, and you may not be able to validate it. That's okay, as long as you can get through that. Now, the second phase of this is to set up, if you notice, I click the notify. We want this system to automatically notify either the servers in the name server tab or, and specify your servers. And again, we want to do our IPControl executive. And what should occur now is whenever we tell it to or get a receive an update, we're going to do a zone transfer. So it's two parts. You have to set up the permission for the server, and then you have to allow it to zone transfer. Okay, so the first thing is let's go ahead and do a reload here. And let's jump back over here and see if we have any information. Yeah, and this is a relatively quick process depending on the zones. Okay, I don't see the serial number there, so that must not have made it back over here. And my Windows server may not be able to even route to it. So one second, let me get a window to troubleshoot this. I spoke too fast. It was apparently still in the transfer process. So as I went out to the shell, and let me just go ahead and show you here, under opt-in control log, the default log is DNS Listener log, so you can effectively tail F that. And this will show the interaction between the domain controller, notify, and the transfer. It was actually going in and doing the transfer. So the way that I knew that is when I go back and look at the domain, and what I was looking at specifically here is I expected this serial number to be updated. It was 1 in the last time I opened, and then immediately went up here when it completed. You'll also you'll see here it was last modified by the DNS listener. And if I look under the resource records now, it has captured all of these resource records by default. Now I want to go see something else. We have a policy on by default that allows us then to create the individual resource records in the DNS domain or for the subnet. So whatever is in the DNS right now, whether dynamic or static, as I had mentioned before, there's no range here. These could be static or dynamic, and we would have that DHCP scope here specifically to outline which ones are dynamic, and everything outside of it would be static. And then you would have the DNS name captured, and you would be able to see who updated that name, the resource record, the owner, the audit, and other details. So now all of the auditing of this will show DNS Listener as being the source that has imported and created the IP device. You would also notify that by the unspecified potentially, and given that the discovery uses unspecified, if it doesn't know what type it is, it'll import them all as unspecified. So I wanted to show you that because that's a very important component. Now again, as we go through this, there's a precedence of order in how we would outline and build the database, set up the subnet, set up the DHCP, perform, potentially any kind of imports if you wanted to, or we could turn on the DNS listener at that point. It would import all of the static addresses as you see them, but if there was a DHCP range, it would fill in those details. So one more thing let's do here. Let's just see if we can do that to represent that. This may take a minute to delete all the addresses. And what we're going to do here is I'm going to create a scope or pool from the end, and I want to do 200. Actually, no, it's not. Let's go back in there. Oh, we got a few more here. All right, now let's try that again. If I could stop clicking that button. 1, 2, add pool. And let's do from the end. And let's do 150 again. Let's try that. There we go. And this will be dynamic DHCP. All right, and I just want to create the pool. Now I'm going to jump back over here again, and let's see if we can redo this again, tell it to reload, and effectively see if it will capture that information again, recreate the statics. And then what I hope to see here is that when I open up the DHCP pool, I'll see all of the IP addresses relative to it. Now, this may not do it because it thinks that the domain's in sync. So let me do one more check here, and we'll have to initiate this again. I'm going to reset this back to 1 so that we have those records. And I might even do this just to clean them out. I don't want to update anything. Just to kind of clean it to the point that we save it again. I probably should have changed the page size. Okay, done. And let's go up here again. Now we'll watch this here for a second, and I'll tell this to reload. Let's see if we can get this to, there it goes. All right. And then let's go check on it here. It still hasn't refreshed it there. All right, let me give this another minute. One check. Okay, there's a lot of technical things that were going on behind the scenes here. So first of all, even though we've updated the database, we did a couple checks there and so forth, the listener puts a lock that has the sequence of serial numbers and it goes through a process. So it knew that there wasn't going to be an update and not to check it. However, I restarted the DNS listener, which in this case is in etc DL and then restart. And I did that just to see if I could get the log to work again or we could get this to retransfer. Otherwise, I may just have to delete the log file and try it again. But let's see what happens here again. Let's try reload one more time. And it still has the checks there, so it has a lock, and see how it has the cache serial number. So let me check one thing here and see what I need to do on this zone. Okay, because I'm just not gonna, let's just try it a different way here. Let's see what we can do. Let's go up to the SOA, and let's try it this way. Let's change this to 8. Well, actually, let's just tell it to increment. We'll do apply. And you'll see here that every time that SOA transfers, it's going to check it. Now, when we do the transfer in the map, we're actually going to go out and we're going to pull the whole zone. We saw that there's more records in the zone than what we collected already, and so we retransfer all of the data. So we basically did an asynchronous update. And in that resource records, then it's going to recreate all of those. Now, as we go back into the subnet again, and I look at this 1.0, I again see all of the IP addresses, but when I look at my pool now, we should see any host names that are relative to the addresses or leases within that range. So now you'll notice that in the addresses that are outside of the scope range that were detected in this particular list of IPs, those were created static. These now are still considered dynamic. So that's how the listener works, and it's a very important process that we use. Now, there are some additional policies I won't go through specifically yet, but that we can set up that hostname check to say, do we want to create the IP? Do we add, delete it if it doesn't exist anymore? And do we allow you to have updates of the resource records? Which sometimes is dangerous once you have a server. You may not necessarily want it to be changed. So there are some policies to think through, and that'll be maybe a later video with operations and other functions there. But I wanted to outline this as a process. And the way that we would work with this in your DNS domains is to extract a list of all of your DNS domains, and we have a pretty simple way of importing DNS domains in bulk. So we could import all of the Microsoft servers or domains, set them up on the server as primary, and then just enable the DNS listener, and we can do that in bulk. And maybe in one of these videos for the imports, we'll cover that and show you how that might be possible. But very important process. I'll go ahead and stop here, and we'll come back and we'll show another video here soon. Take care.